This is Counterpoint.
Welcome to another episode of Counterpoint, recorded here in the European Parliament. With me today in the studio are David Lega, member of the European Parliament from Sweden for the EPP. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and also the EPP Standing and Monitoring Rapporteur on Iran. And Kasra Aarabi, Senior Analyst at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, based in London. Kasra is an Iran expert who particularly deals with the inner workings of the regime. As the nuclear talks in Vienna are stalled, we want to take this opportunity to talk about Iran, and specifically not so much about the negotiations as such, but about the inner workings and goings-on in Iran. Let me turn first to you, David. You initiated recently a resolution in the European Parliament condemning Iran's excessive use of death penalty. Can you bring us a little bit up to speed on what the European Parliament has done and acted upon recently with regards to Iran?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting us to this very important talk. For me, the resolution, I was so happy and proud that it was adopted with a very strong cross-party support. And what we do in the resolution is that we reiterate the strong opposition to the death penalty in all circumstances and calls on the Iranian regime to introduce an immediate moratorium on the use of the death penalty as a step towards abolition and commute all death sentences, which is now extremely important, not the least in a European-Swedish perspective, since we just learned a few days ago that the Swedish-Iranian doctor, Dr. Ahmad Reza Jalali, got a date, 21st of May, that he will be executed in Iran, which is absolutely horrible. So we need to do everything we can in our power, and we, from the European side, we need to get Josep Borrell to act extremely fast in this.
Right. Now, what would you like to see, particularly if we look at the next Foreign Affairs Council meeting, what would you like to hear Borrell, as you said, and other foreign ministers say, not just on this case, but on the general state of affairs in the Islamic Republic?
Yeah, but I mean, it's our duty to continue the support for a free and democratic Iran, and we can do that many ways. I believe Magnitsky sanctions are extremely important. We need to continue to do those. We could do a lot better job when it comes to the Magnitsky sanction. We could target more people, but also we could be a lot more efficient when we do it and faster in our reactions. So that's one thing we could do, and we need to continue the soft policies as well.
Right. Kasra, the sticking point right now at nuclear talks is about the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Islamic Republic insists that the United States remove it from its list of foreign terrorist organizations. Now, could you enlighten us a little bit of what role does the IRGC play in Tehran, across the region? And what would be the implications if the United States were to agree to delist the IRGC?
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, again, thanks for inviting me at this. Really, it is a critical moment on Iran policy. In terms of the Revolutionary Guard, the first thing to note is the Revolutionary Guard is not a conventional state armed force. It's not a conventional military. It is not a conventional military in the sense that it's not attached to Iran as a nation state. The Revolutionary Guard started off as 7 militias, 7 Islamist militias that came under one umbrella, the Revolutionary Guard. Their goal was to consolidate the clergy's grip violently in post-revolutionary Iran. And since then, they have maintained this role. So the role the Revolutionary Guard has is to preserve and advance the Islamic Revolution at home and abroad. If you look at the Iranian constitution, the 1979 constitution, which is still in play today, the Revolutionary Guard's objective is defined as having an ideological mission of jihad in God's way to extend Sharia globally. So that's the exporting the Islamic Revolution abroad. Domestically, its role is to preserve Velayat Fari, which is the Shia Islamist system of governance that transfers power to Ayatollah Khamenei as God's representative on earth and the 12th divinely ordained Shia Imam's deputy. So the Revolutionary Guard today, I wouldn't even refer to it as a military. It is an organization. It is an ideological organization. It is a state within a state. It has a military branch, it has a cultural branch, it has an economic branch, it has an intelligence branch, and really it has pervaded every aspect of the regime. Now that's not to say, and there is, other people say and have read this as, they may seek to kind of launch a military kind of coup against the regime. Not at all. Khamenei is divesting power in the Revolutionary Guard willingly. He said he wants the Revolutionary Guard to grow in power and size by up to 100 times. Why? Because the Revolutionary Guard growing in power means that the hardline clergy are going to strengthen and strengthen. On the actual DNA of the Guard, it started off as a militia, and it's maintained that militia identity, which is part of its DNA. So just look at the way it behaves and the way it operates. First of all, indoctrination, like other Islamist militias, is key. So radicalization, similar to the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but this is the Shia interpretation. So we have different kind of reading and interpretation of Islam. But radicalization is key, and indoctrination makes up for more than 50% of the Revolutionary Guard's training. Not only that, let's look at the way they behave. What's their modus operandi? Militancy, terrorism, hostage takings, and hijackings. Insurgency. They don't behave like a nation-state conventional armed force. And they even recognize, by the way, just this final point, they say we are the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran is not even in our name.
Right. So clearly they, as you said, they operate very similar to Al-Qaeda in the sense that they have a branch responsible for indoctrination, and they carry out terrorist activities. Now, what would be the signal and the consequences of delisting them? And I'm not talking about the legal repercussions necessarily, what it would mean from a US perspective and sanctions, but what would be the signal inside the Islamic?
Well, there's a few things. The first is symbolic. It would be symbolic. It would legitimize the Revolutionary Guard's policies. And the Islamic Republic will use that as a propaganda victory. What is the official policy of the Revolutionary Guard? Official policy is to eradicate the state of Israel, what they refer to as the Zionist regime. Anti-Americanism is at the core of the Revolutionary Guard's ideology. They believe Khamenei was speaking on Putin's invasion of Ukraine recently. He supported Putin's invasion of Ukraine, still supports it, and he said that the West is collapsing. Islam is in a permanent war with barbarism, the age of barbarism and the age of ignorance. And the US is the modern age of ignorance and age of barbarism. So it would legitimize their anti-US policies. Now, not only that, they have created a list and they have openly stated that they want to assassinate US officials. So again, delisting them symbolically, what does that mean? There's also the aspect in terms of practical implications. When the IRGC was designated as a foreign terrorist organization, it made it absolutely clear, if you do business via yourself or a third party with an entity that is tied to the IRGC, you are bankrolling terrorism. Not only that, it provides tech companies with a clear mandate to remove Revolutionary Guard propaganda and ideological material, the same way they would remove ISIS and Al-Qaeda ideological material for radicalization purposes. That FTO makes it very clear that, this content is extremist and violent in nature. So the IRGC, certainly by the standards of, if Hezbollah is on the US list, the Hezbollah was created by the Revolutionary Guard. Hossein Dehqan, who was the so-called reformist Rouhani administration's defense minister, Hossein Dehqan, IRGC commander, he wrote the Hezbollah Charter in the 1980s. If Hezbollah warrants being on the list, then you have to go after its main supporter, ideologically, militarily, financially, and in terms of training. So if they're on the list, then the IRGC warrants being on the list for sure.
Right. Now, at the moment, the nuclear talks are stalled. In Europe, in generally, there never was a real deep discussion about the pros and cons of the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, unlike in the US. But you have always been quite outspoken about it. What is your view on the original deal and the current negotiations?
Well, as a start, I think it's extremely important to don't give up on the sunset clause. I think that's extremely important. That's one thing. The other thing is that we talk a little too little on the effects if Iran doesn't follow a possible nuclear agreement. What are the sanctions? How can we act swiftly in case that a new agreement would be broken? So I think that is more important because there is a real risk, naturally, that Iran won't follow a deal regardless of what it says afterwards.
Right.
So I think that's something we need to discuss as well. But I do see a bit of shift and worry, at least within the parliament, hopefully also in other institutions within the European Union, that I see more concern and worry that we are doing the same mistakes with Iran as we did with Russia. That we thought that we could continue to just be very friendly and nice, and that would help in the long run, which we now have seen crystal clear, even since we didn't listen to the voices who warned us against it. So I do hope that this time we will be more open towards actually listening to the critiques instead of calling them warmongers, as we did with Kasparov, for example.
Right.
So that's one important thing in this. But also, for the first time within the European Parliament, we managed to brand Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
I put that amendment on the table for a resolution, and it got adopted. And Hezbollah was mentioned for the first time of this House in the same sentence as Al-Qaeda. So we are starting to move in that direction, but it takes
signal.
Too much time, unfortunately.
Right. David already mentioned, and I know you've worked on it, on trying to assess the potential parallels that exist with the West, perhaps inability to properly analyze Putin and Russia's next action, and whether there may be perhaps similar problems with our analysis
Sure.
of what we are dealing with in terms of Islamic Republic. Can you elaborate on some of these similarities?
Sure, absolutely. We absolutely have to learn from the mistakes that resulted in us misleading and misreading the clear signs, the clear writing on the wall. Despite the fact that our intelligence was correct, Russia was on the verge, Putin was on the verge of invading Ukraine, and he did. But still, the mood was, even days before the invasion, that, oh no, he's just using this as a negotiating strategy, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we need to learn from the three factors, I think, that led us to misread Putin. The first, I think, is being very aware of this organized propaganda campaign that Russia had, for example, that led. And this ranges, by the way, some of it's organized and some of it's informal. It ranges between kind of apologists in the West for kind of Putin's regime to kind of paid operatives. And these are the same people that said, it's NATO's fault. It's NATO enlargement that's causing Putin.
You can still hear it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? We have the exact same thing with the Islamic Republic. We have individuals operating, really, it is what I would describe as an informal lobby network. That, for example, they are seeking to capitalize on disdain, for example, for former President Trump, and saying that actually, and this is published stuff, by the way, they've said, for example, anti-Americanism in the Islamic Republic was caused by Trump. I mean, for the past 43 years, the slogan of the Islamic Republic has been deaf to America, not deaf to Trump.
Right. In that sense, I've also repeatedly heard the argument that Iran is being surrounded by America in Afghanistan and Iraq, and therefore...
Or military spending is another one. I mean, again, goes back to the IRGC's DNA. The IRGC, the Islamic Republic, first of all, you should never take the stats for what they are, because the Islamic Republic has a black economy and slush funds, and they don't declare, you know, the official state budget is only one aspect of where the Revolutionary Guard receives its money. Right? Second of all, the Revolutionary Guard, Hezbollah, all the proxies across the Middle East, the Houthis, etc., they are insurgencies. They don't operate like conventional state armies. They don't have the same defense kind of budgets. Insurgency is a relatively cheap way of warfare compared to conventional state armed forces. So that exists. The first being very wary of the apologists. And, you know, that ranges from kind of useful idiots to illiberal intellectuals, you know, intellectuals that are across academia who do not like liberal capitalism and view America and the West as liberal capitalist hegemons. And, you know, if that means siding with the Islamic Republic or Putin, then so be it. And so that's the first aspect, propaganda. The second is naivety. You know, being kind of, and this is really kind of, it derives from hubris, I think, with the liberal order, the post kind of Cold War order, that, you know, that this world order was kind of, you weren't able to violate this order. You know, it would be irrational for Putin to act, you know, to invade Ukraine, because, you know, we understand rationality. It was, you know, it seemed to us it was irrational, and therefore he wouldn't do it. And that was the basis, right? It doesn't make sense for him to invade. No. And again, this kind of derives from, again, Western arrogance. It goes, you know, Putin, Khamenei, they have their own rationality, but it's defined by their worldview. Right. For Putin, that decision was logical. For Khamenei, enforcing the hijab, for example, on women, despite the fact that women oppose, the overwhelming majority of women in Iran oppose it, enforcing that by violently is rational. Hostility towards Israel, from his worldview, is rational. Why wouldn't you? And you speak to kind of these hardline Islamists and you listen to what they say. For them, that is what is rational. So it's being very aware of that rationality and saying, you know, they may have different, you know, a different set of rationality than we do.
Right. It's sort of a Eurocentrist approach.
It is very West-centric.
That we all have ultimately the same goals. We all supposedly just want prosperity.
And I find it incredible because it's remarkable that we've fallen into this trap, and it really comes back to hubris, because look at the way Putin and Khamenei, look at their views on women, look at their views on ethnic minorities, religious minorities, look at the way they treat homosexuals. This is all done in their name of logic. So on other issues, of course they view the world differently to us. Their rationality is defined by the confines and boundaries of their worldview. And, you know, naivety led us to say, Putin wouldn't invade, despite the fact that he'd encircled Ukraine. Right. What if we're making the same mistake with Khamenei? Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guard have encircled Israel. They're pouring resources. They're not just saying it, they are arming Hezbollah to the teeth. They're opening new fronts on the Israeli border. What if, like Putin, Khamenei acted on what he's been saying for years? Will we just say he's gone mad suddenly? Just because, you know, it doesn't fit our kind of confines of West-centric and, you know, West-centric rationality. And very quickly, the last one is selective hearing, and this goes back to David's point. You know, when Putin wrote this 5,000-word piece outlining clearly his imperialist ambitions for Ukraine, it was dismissed as domestic consumption. When Garry Kasparov spoke out about this in 2014, he predicted what would go on. He was labelled a warmonger and ignored. Khamenei has done exactly the same. Every time he kind of publishes something, people, you know, in the West, we have a tendency to go, oh, it's just for domestic hearing. But actually, if you go and read what he said, you know, for example, in February 2019, he launched this manifesto that outlines the next 40 years. Go and read what he says. From 2019 to today, he's done everything, basically. You can tick them off. So being wary of the propaganda and disinformation, being wary not to fall into the trap of naivety, and selective hearing. Those are the three factors that led us to misread Putin, and they risk misreading Khamenei.
Ultimately, the most important lesson is that believe your enemy.
Yeah.
Right. Last question, maybe to both of you. What would be, you know, your policy advice? What needs to change if we wanted to really confront the Islamic Republic as we are at this pivotal state where there is a chance the deal may not go through, or even if it does go through, would only provide for a limited period of delay on the nuclear front. But how do we confront a aggressive, revolutionary Islamic Republic?
Well, in my opinion, I think we need to be, regarding to your 3 points you just said, for naivety, I don't think we're as naive anymore. Now we're struggling to find the right way to act. One way is to be much harder on disinformation coming from Iran. There we are way too soft. We're only looking at China and Russia. We're not looking at Iran at all yet. I say we do need a special task force, Stratcom task force under the External Action Service on Iran too, and I hope to get more support from this House in that issue, because we need to be aware of what they're doing, not only to Europe as a whole, but to each individual country within the European Union. Another thing is we cannot go soft on sanctions, regardless of what's happening with the JCPOA. We need to expand and harden on the Magnitsky as well. So these things would be very important to start with, and we must stop taking part in the charade, like we did when we sent representatives to the inauguration of Raisi, the president, the hangman of Tehran.
Days after two Europeans were killed.
Yeah.
Days after two
Exactly.
European citizens were killed.
Representatives, not Borrell, but we sent representatives from the European Union to attend a false election. I mean, in Iran, we don't need to do that.
Less than 1 minute, Kasra, your main point.
First, I think to use this moment in the kind of collapse of the talks to pause, reassess, recalibrate. I think the Europeans and the Americans need to come together and have some transatlantic consensus on all the kind of pillars of disagreement. So we need to look at this holistically. We need to look at Iran's regional destabilization, ballistic missiles, nuclear. Also, what is going on inside of Iran? There has been an unprecedented wave of secularization and liberalization inside of Iran. Khamenei knows that, and that's why he's empowering the Revolutionary Guard, both locally and at state level. Future protests will be part of the future landscape inside of Iran, and so far there has been no real consequences for the violent suppression that the Revolutionary Guard and Khamenei has used against ordinary Iranians. So I think being very aware that the domestic landscape is key to this. And finally, if I may, is looking at where does the Islamic Republic stand in relation to this new world order that's emerging, that we're seeing that is unfolding after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Khamenei fully supports Putin's invasion. Khamenei views this as the collapse of the West, is granting billions of dollars, between 90, the estimates range, but they start from 90 billion you can go north. Is that going to benefit the West's interest, or is that going to bolster the kind of league of dictatorships which the Islamic Republic is very much in alliance with Putin in?
All right. Thank you both so much for joining me today, and thank you for tuning in.